Hi everyone. So we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to walk through a full end-to-end implementation of an internal tool. And this is designed to help anyone in a HR team to actually develop something that they can use themselves and actually have used across the organization. So we're going to skip over a few things that will be important if you actually put this into production. There's going to be security implications for a lot of this stuff. There's also going to be different development environments that you may need to use. But really, this is designed to help you get from the kind of 80% solution of playing around within a coding tool or a coding environment and actually getting something live that people can use. Now, the project I've chosen to do this was something that I saw on one of my engagements where there was a large organization that didn't actually have an up-to-date internal org chart. And that made it very difficult to actually track what was happening across an organization, to look at reporting lines. And it didn't exist in the HRIS because it was a global company. And so they had reporting lines that went across different regions, and each region had its own unique HRIS. And the Active Directory built into Outlook was not always kept up to date. So this is really a kind of a tool that I felt like the HR team really needed to own. The expense of actually implementing something like this and the timeline that it would normally take was kind of prohibitive for the team, given they were moving fast and actually managing 1,000 different things at once. So what I'm hoping to do here is give you the outline, overview, full walkthrough to actually implement something like this yourself. The actual cost of the tool that I scoped out wound up being $2 per employee per month. And for a 4,000 person organization, you're looking at $100,000 a year in a contract, which just seems crazy when you can actually knock something up in an afternoon, actually implement it, and it'll be completely customizable. And once you know how to do this, you can actually really start to expand on any kind of idea you want and actually create kind of customizable interfaces and fields and color coding and everything else. We're going to go with the basics today. I'm going to try and speed through this as quickly as possible. You can pause it and obviously go back. And to start off with, there will be a few tools that you're going to need. And I've picked the simplest ones, or the ones that I'm most familiar with. But depending on how you like to kind of work, you may have different tools that are available to you or that you prefer. So we're going to jump into it. And what I'm going to do is shrink myself down, throw myself in the corner here, and kind of walk you through the tools first that we're going to go through. So one of the main things you're going to need is a GitHub account. That's because you're going to copy this repo that I published. It's completely public, and you can download it. You can use it for whatever you want. And it gives you the description of what we're trying to build, which is an organizational chart. And this really just gives you the overview of what we actually want within that chart. We want a way to authenticate people because we don't want anyone from the public being able to access this. So we'll have an authentication process. We're going to use this magic link fallback, which basically means once you've created an account, you could just put your email in and that'll send you a link and you can kind of log in from there. Obviously, if you have an internal IT team that's kind of has everything built out, you'll probably want to integrate something like a Microsoft Entra ID or a single sign-on with maybe the Gmail suite or something like that. But I'm trying to keep it really simple here. Different roles so that we can actually edit this and actually give a role to a viewer for someone in the organization that can actually go in and look up within the directory and look at the org chart, but wouldn't necessarily be making adjustments there. A few different views, and then kind of views for the actual employee profile ID. The tech stack we're going to be using, I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. So we're going to have one app environment, which is going to be built out using Microsoft Azure, which is my development environment of choice. We're going to use TypeScript and Next.js, just given there's a lot of different kind of coding environments that will default to this anyway. And I think it can actually help create something that's kind of very user-friendly. We're going to have some environment variables. It's going to be important to actually capture these. So essentially what this is a way to store some unique variables that you're going to be using later on. And then what I've done here is actually I built this app out earlier today. Then I deleted everything apart from a few files so that I could upload the repo and actually do this full build along while refactoring some of the prompts that I've used so that we don't have to recreate everything from scratch, but you can actually see in real time how I'm going through things. So that's the overall kind of environment. You'll see the link to the org chart within the description below. You see this is an MIT license, which means you can do whatever you want with this code base. You'll see a couple of other files in here. One is the PRD, or product requirement document. what I've done essentially, and I left the Java basic clone in here as well, because that is essentially the type of tool that we're trying to mimic. And what I found helpful when I'm building internal tools is to look at something that's in the market that already exists, and essentially just kind of copy the product requirements from the way that that's described to actually give me the features that I potentially want. Once the baseline is kind of in place, I can then kind of edit and adjust further down the road. So you can look at the product requirement doc, and there's also a prompts file in here as well. This is going to give us the full prompts that we're actually going to copy and paste, put into our development environment, and actually build this out as we go along. And you can see the demo sequence at the bottom down here. This is essentially what I plan to go through with you today. So we're going to work through everything step by step. The other things that you're going to need, firstly, you're going to need a database environment. For this, I'm going to use Supabase. I don't use it very often, but it's actually very easy to integrate, has a lot of security already built into it. So I really like this environment, and we're going to create a new project in here. For deploying the app, we're going to use Microsoft Azure, and we're going to create a new app service, and we're going to kind of build that out. And that's where we're going to ship all our code to, so that anyone with a link to the site can actually access that. And then our coding environment is going to be built using Codex. Codex has been my environment of choice. I haven't really experimented with Claude or Cursor or any of the other tools that are available, just because I've been with OpenAI from the start, and I actually have a lot of familiarity with the API and actually with the type of development. So I've decided to stick with Codex. And the reason that I like this stack of Codex and Microsoft Azure, we have our Supabase and we have our kind of prompts here, is that when you actually set this up within your development environment, you can actually add the integrations, because they're pretty much fully integrated in most development environments, so that you can actually do the work directly in here without actually having to kind of copy and paste between different files. I essentially use ChatGPT as my coding co-pilot. I never really got into the GitHub Copilot thing, but as I've learned how to build software and write code, I found that this setup works really well for me, and hopefully will work for you. So without any more preamble, we're going to jump straight into it, because it's going to take a while for each of these prompts to run. And so while the prompt is running, we're going to talk a little bit about what it's doing, and then I'm going to go and do the setup kind of in real time. I'm going to be copying all of the keys across, so you're going to see exactly what you'll need. So let's kick off with the initial Codex prompts. So we'll go back to our prompt environment, and we will look at the prompt one foundation. So what I'm going to do first is actually copy this code base into our repo so that we can actually get started. All I'm going to do is go to the link that you'll find in the description, go to code, and I use SSH, just copy this to the clipboard. And then in the coding environment here, so I'm using VS Code. Using the terminal tab, all I'm going to do is type git clone and clone that. So now if I actually open the folder, I'm going to do this. I'm going to open the meander.org chart folder. Then what you should now see is that we're now in this new environment. I'm going to close this down, and then we are going to kind of jump straight in. So you can see here, it's just copied a few files across. We have this environment set up, which is all kind of dummy values. We have like git ignore. This is really important, because what we don't want to do is when we push our code base back to GitHub, we don't want to share anything that's secret or anything that is potentially just going to create a lot of junk in that folder. We have our license. It does say copyright to me, but I don't really care. You can delete all that if you want to. Our PR product requirement doc and prompts and README are all in there as well. So now you have a local copy of everything. So if you wanted to, you could actually copy and paste from here. I'm going to do it from the GitHub page just because the formatting is a little easier to see. And there are ways to actually preview this in the development environment, but I'm going to close all of this. So let's go back to our Codex, and we'll try that one again, where we'll go to our prompts, and then let's go for the first prompts, and we'll get going. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to give the Codex tool the prompt to actually get started building this environment. If you can see what the prompt is actually doing, it's treating the Codex AI agent as a full stack developer, and it's giving a step-by-step instruction for exactly what they need to do in order to start to build this tool out. So we've added some constraints in there, and we want it to do a validation once it's finished building out the code base. You can actually follow along and see, what the code is doing. If you also click to the top here, you can actually see as it's starting to build out the different packages in here and the different kind of code base, you can kind of see all that kind of building out. So see Node, which is the server that everything's built on top of. And this will gradually build up over time. We'll keep an eye on this. But while we're setting that up, the next thing we want to do is actually create our local environment. So we're going to go back to our Explorer here, and we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it .env.local. So it's going to be very similar to our .env.example, so you can actually copy it directly from there. But what we're going to add in here is we're going to copy these files across and paste them in here. And these are things that we're going to need in order to connect to our database. And it's really important that we connect to our database because when we upload employee lists, we want it to sit in a database so that we can make updates, we can delete things, we can add new things. It's just a way to have a permanent record of everything in a very secure, structured place. And hopefully it's secure if you follow all the safety procedures when you set up your Supabase account. But this is what we're going to kind of get started with. So we have that in place now. We'll run the dependency install after we've gone through the first prompt, and then we can see what the tool looks like at this stage. We'll go back and see how the Codex is running. So it's building out the initial scaffolding, the initial framework. While it's doing that, let's jump across to our Supabase and we'll actually create our database now. I've created an account here. You can see this is actually managed by one of the separate accounts that I have, but we're going to create a new project. You see, I don't really use Supabase for work projects. I use it for a lot for personal projects in a separate account, but this is a free plan, so it doesn't cost anything to actually build this database out. Obviously, if you're building something out at scale, you're going to need to pay more for it. But we're going to set up a new project, and we're going to name this project Meander Org Chart. We're going to generate a database password. So once this is generated, I'm going to copy it across and actually put it into my local environment here. Again, you shouldn't be able to use these once I finish recording this video because I'm going to delete everything. But I'm just going to keep everything as kind of clean as possible so that you can actually see as we go along. So all I did there was generate a password and copy that across. And I'm going to select my region. I'm here in Boston, so I don't want to use Oregon. I want to use an East Coast region. Probably North Virginia is probably closest. And I want to enable the data API because that's what's going to allow us to connect from our app directly to the database. So we'll create this new project. And it's fairly straightforward. I like Supabase because it's relatively plug and play. And we'll set Codex as finished. And so now that we have our projects up and running, we can actually start to add in our environment variables here and then test out that first version of the product. So let's go into our project and we'll pull out our project URL. So we just copy that across from here. So the project URL is going to go in this public Supabase URL. I'm going to save that. Publishable default key. So we're going to copy this across. That's going to be our API key. And we're going to save that. And then we want to connect our app. So we'll click on this connect button down here. And we're going to get the connection from next. Okay, so we already have those in place actually. It's the secret key that we need, which is somewhere else. And I'm just going to go and find this until it's been a while since I've used Supabase. So we want to connect. All right, so we're going to connect to our project. And the way we're going to do that is go down to the bottom here. We look at our project API. We have our URL, which I've already pasted in here, publishable key. And if we go to API key setting, we can pull out our secret key as well. This is actually going to allow us to make adjustments to the database locally. So once I copy this across, I can add this to the secret key. We're actually not going to deploy that into the app. That's just going to be for a local environment. We're going to save that. And we are then going to pull up our terminal. So once we have done that, we're going to go back and we're going to say npm install. So that's the first setup. So it's going to install everything that we need to run this. And then we're going to say npm run dev. So N is just the node package manager. All we're doing is running this as in the development environment, and we're going to create a local instance of this. So here we go. We have Supabase connection is okay, which means that it's actually connected using these keys here, and everything is in place. So we actually have our kind of structural foundation in place. We know it's connected to the database, and so this is all running as needed. So we're going to close this down, close this, and we're going to come out of our kind of base here. And what we're going to do next is go to set up the schema, environment, and Supabase clients. So we're going to copy the prompt from prompt 2, drop it into here, and then we're going to kind of push that out and have the development environment build that for us. So stage 2, what we're actually going to do is set up our database so that we have the models that we need. And so the way that this works is you have your app, and then you have your database. and the database is where all of the different kind of app tools work. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we just dropped the prompt 2 into the development environment. So what it's going to do is actually start to connect the model that we need in order to run the app to the database. So we have this prompt here, which is going to set all that up for us. So because we've set up the Supabase account in the project, that's going to run all the kind of database backend work for us. And what this is going to do is tie the front end to that database so that when we set up a new account, when we upload different data sets, it's actually going to store it in that database. We don't have to keep referring back to an Excel file or a kind of a local spreadsheet. So you can see what it's going to do here is create different kind of Supabase helpers. We're going to have our variables, which we've already built out, and we're going to run a validation once it's done. So this is now executing the plan. So it's adding a new migration to the Supabase database. It's actually giving us a kind of cleaner environmental check, and we should have a new environment example here, which is actually going to be kind of cleaner for any kind of future reference. It shouldn't change our local environment, which it hasn't. And all we need to do now is just wait for that to finish. So while we're waiting for that to finish, what we can do is start setting up our Azure server. Now, I really like the way that Azure, so we have our app services, so we can kind of create our apps from this page. You can see I already have a bunch in here. This is one of my favorite kind of tools to use, because you can basically just spin up a server, send your app to that server, and then anyone with the link can access it. All of my kind of projects that I run and demonstrate, the actual Meander Talent Academy is all built on this. You can see the Meander Learn is our kind of talent academy. You can see all the different pricing tiers. Some of the things I have is like free because I'm just demoing them. So all of these are different kind of projects and prototypes. And Microsoft has a very, very good startup package where they'll actually give you a bunch of credits to do all your development work while you're still getting things up off the ground. Unfortunately, I'm still a member of that, so I'm pretty happy. So we'll walk through the process of actually creating the web app. If you don't have a subscription in place, you actually need to kind of get one set up. We're going to use our Azure sponsorship because it's free for me to do that. We're going to create a new resource group. So we're going to create here. We're going to call this YouTube demo. So what we're doing here is just kind of creating a way to organize the apps that we're going to have in place. And we're going to call our app the Meander org chart. And it's going to give us a unique URL here, which is fine. We're going to deploy code. You can actually deploy containers. I found them to be a little fiddly, so it's probably just because I'm not a great software developer, but I much prefer to just deploy the code directly to the server and have the server build out the app. That's proven to be pretty good for me so far. We're gonna build onto a Node server. Node 20 is actually going. It's not going to be supported for much longer. So I'm going to use Node 22 because I've used that plenty of times and it seems to work pretty well. I'm going to set our region here. We're going to use East US. We're going to use a plan. We'll just call it demo app, which is a pretty basic plan. So essentially, all we're going to do here is create the web app using some pretty basic settings. Click review and create, and that's going to give us that resource that we can then kind of deploy our app to at some point in the future. So this is going to run through the whole process. It's going to set everything up for us. I'll go back here. We'll see how we're getting on. And so great, we've actually set up our environment, the files that have been changed. And let's take a look at the settings now. So you can see that we have everything built out in here. We have our Supabase folder in here now, which is the one that's going to actually connect and help us run things on the database side. And if we run development again, all I did is press the up arrow. That just repeats the previous terminal command. You can see that everything is working again. I can have my camera back. Okay, so org chart is fully working. Everything's set up, ready to go. So let's keep moving on, and we'll go to our prompt 3, which is the browse feature. So now we actually, we know that we have the tool in place. We know that the structure's there. Now we actually want to build the front end that's going to allow us to actually browse the org chart. So we're just going to paste this prompt directly in here. Again, you can kind of go through the prompt and see what it's doing. All we're doing here is actually creating the kind of overall template for what this app is going to use. So essentially, we're going to be able to upload a CSV of the current employees, and we'll see what that structure looks like in a few minutes. And then once that's uploaded, we're going to be able to go into a directory and actually search through a directory and find the employees that we want. We want to go through an org chart, which is actually looking at how everyone reports into each other. This one is actually quite complicated to do, and you can actually find that you've got some errors in there. So that will be something that we're not going to cover today, but would be potentially something you might want to think about implementing as you're working through your coding environment. And then there's this final route, which is for employees, and actually look at an individual employee. We'll be able to then import our CSV and actually start to then look at the data that we have. So that's going to be our next prompt. While we're waiting for that to happen, let's go into the sample data set here. So this is included in the repo. So when you download the repo, you'll get this employee sample database. Obviously, you can change this and implement your own. It's just a small selection of employees that is really just for demo purposes. But we have names, employee IDs, emails, job titles, locations, manager employee ID, status, and start date. And the manager employee ID is really important because essentially what we're going to do is we're creating a tree, and it's going to graph how each employee is related to another employee. And this is how you kind of build that org chart. So we're going to do that all within the code. The thing that we really need to make sure we do if we're going to upload some fresh data is ensure that the employee IDs are accurate and that the manager IDs are accurate. And keeping those up to date is going to be one of the most important things. Now, once we're finished, and you'll see the different authorization structures that we have in the different roles, what you should be able to do is, rather than going into an Excel file and then manually updating everything and re-uploading it, you should actually be able to update this in the app itself and stay on top of things. And you can imagine you have one person who's responsible for the org chart, who would be the administrator, and then maybe a regional HR business partner who's responsible for keeping up to date within their region. And then the third role is then the viewer, who's then going to be able to kind of go in and just actually search through the directory and look at the org chart. And this just gives you that kind of freedom to manage the kind of different accounts. And it's fairly straightforward for, just 35 employees. If you have, 35,000 employees, it gets quite complicated. It should mean that you can actually build this for any number of people. And all we maybe want to do is refactor the code base to accommodate that amount of people, and maybe use some additional third-party software, which we're not going to cover today. So you can see it's going through the process. It's actually running a bunch of things in parallel, which is quite nice. So that way we don't have to wait quite as long, but we're still working through this browse view. If you keep this open, you can actually start to see things appear on the nav bar here. So, okay, we have the org chart. It's run everything. So what we're going to do is actually, all I'm pressing here is Control C to stop the server, and then we'll start the server up again. And let's refresh the page, and we'll see where we are. Okay, still have my camera, which is great. So now we have our org chart, Supabase connection is in place. So we have our home, we have our directory. Okay, failed to load directory, our org chart, failed to load org chart. Okay, and so we can actually see in here, if we look at the actual terminal, we can see the full error in here. Now, my guess is that because we don't have any employees currently, we're coming up with an error. So we're going to move ahead to the next prompt and then see how that actually helps us to kind of fix this. So we're going to copy this next prompt, which is the CSV import pipeline, paste it into the Codex tool here. And we're actually going to have that run and the whole process. And so I kind of already previewed what's happening now. We're actually kind of getting close to the end of the development cycle. So we're 30 minutes into this process. You actually are hopefully starting to see how simple this actually is. But what we're going to do now with our prompt is allow us to import a CSV that has those column names that we already defined, and make sure that we have all the validation in place, and that once we do import, it actually pushes it to the database and creates that kind of database structure that we have. So if we go into the database right now, we can actually start to explore it a little bit and see, okay, we don't have any tables, we don't have any functions yet. And so one of the things that we're probably going to have to do, if the Codex tool doesn't already do this, is actually build the schema out. I'm going to do that from the VS Code environment. We're not going to mess around with anything in Supabase. I just want to use one tool to kind of manage everything. We'll kind of wait and see what happens when this prompt is finished running. We don't have the server up and running right now, so we can't see what's going on there. But let's go back to our Azure page, and we can see that the deployment is now complete. We have our YouTube demo resource group, and we can go to our resource and we can see we have our Meander org chart. One is the domain. So if I click through to this domain now, this is something we've just created and already it's live. And you can see when it loads up, it's going to give us the kind of generic welcome screen to say that the app is not fully deployed yet. But this is going to give us the ability to actually point to a live production version of the app once we're finished kind of building everything out. We'll give that a little bit of time to load. The other thing to look at here is you can add your custom domain. So when you go to my website and you go to meanderhq.com, that's actually built out into one app service and actually have that as my marketing site. If you go to learn.meanderhq.com, that's actually a separate app service. We have a custom domain built out, and I use Cloudflare to connect to the custom domain to connect to the app service. So once you actually have this built out, if you want to set this up as a full URL with a descriptive title, you can do that. You can see that the stack is all in here and we have everything built out. If you find that the app service runs a little too slow, you can actually scale up the app services, and you can see that what we have here is a development testing service, which is relatively slow. I use production environments for all of my actual customer facing tools, but the free ones are really good for building internal tools or testing things out and building something up. All you do is just click a button and upgrade when you're ready to kind of go further. So let's go back to our overview of our org chart. And we can see here that we have like a bunch of information which may be helpful at some point in the future, but unlikely to be a problem for us right now. The website's clearly not loading, so there's probably something going on there. But I'm going to go back to our prompt page, reload the camera so you can see my face, and we'll take a look and see where we are. So let's just reading through what we've got to here. So it's still working on the import service. They did find typos. It's interesting when the code makes a mistake, then recognizes a mistake, and then fixes it. Sometimes you actually have to spend a lot of time debugging. I would really push you to just use natural language when you're trying to debug and explain exactly what you want the tool to do. But one of the benefits of actually having everything built out in the tool here is that you can copy and paste the error messages and just dump them straight back into Codex. All right, let's see how we're doing. Okay, so we've finished this prompt here. So it's wired up the import of our routing. All right, so this looks like it's all completed. So let's build up our server again. We'll go back to our local host and we'll refresh the page. So we have our org chart. So import employee CSV. Let's choose the file. So we're going to go from our samples folder and import employee sample. Let's see if this works first time. So we're going to import CSV. All right. So here we're seeing an error. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have our terminal. That's 500 error means that there's an issue connecting our app to our Supabase database. So what I like to do here is just paste the error message directly back into Codex and just see what it does. I think most likely there's either something that we've not configured in Supabase, or there's been a kind of more legacy code that the Codex tool has written that is no longer kind of applicable to what we're trying to do. So while we're waiting for that to finish, we're going to go back over here. We see we actually had a gateway timeout for our app. So nothing to worry about right now because we don't actually have anything uploaded. But we're going to really focus on our local environment and make sure that this is fully working before we think about deploying it into production. So it looks like the error is in Supabase. My guess is that we actually haven't set up the tables in Supabase yet. So was there anything in here about setting the tables up? I think there probably was a little bit further down, but maybe we've missed that in here. So while we think about our Supabase schema, I don't think we actually updated the schema for our Supabase file. So let's see how we're getting on there. For input jobs to the table truly isn't available in Supabase. I'm going to try applying migration directly. So I actually had this problem when I was running the test on this, and I think that Supabase works well with something called Docker. And essentially what Docker does is it creates this virtual environment on your local machine that then kind of runs everything inside of it. And what you can essentially do is kind of take this environment and just like slot it into a server in production, and nothing really changes. I've had a lot of like configuration issues when I've been doing that, but it's supposed to be a much easier way. So let's see what my preference is to actually deploy the code and have the code built out in the server and then connect it directly to the database and actually run everything through VS Code, which is my development environment. Okay. So they patched the import, fixed the root causes, and says to fix the root cause, apply stage 2 migration to what? We're back now. So when I refreshed the Supabase page, my browser shut down, which means that my Loom shut down and all the recording stopped. Fortunately, that video is still safe. We're going to edit everything together. And I was able to fix the problem. You can see that the Codex is going nuts on the right-hand side here. Ultimately, the problem was related to how the app creates data in the table, not importing the data itself, but actually doing the kind of initial schema build out, making sure that we have the right tables with the right structure in place. So you can see now I actually just ran the same import that we tested that failed, and this works fine. If I go back over to the project, I can show you where the error was rising from. So when you connect to your database, you can actually connect, and we're using Node because that's the JavaScript. One of the things that we see down here is it's not IPv4 compatible. So we actually have to have a different security connection. In the kind of deep dive I did on the right-hand side, I found that the database just kept failing to connect. One of the things that was generated actually from our previous prompt was the SQL code, SQL structured query language, if you've never used it before. And what you can actually do, and I just did, is just copy and paste that directly into the SQL editor in Supabase. And once you run that, you actually get the tables all set up. So if I go into the table editor here, we have employees, we have user roles, and we have import jobs. So when I actually run that import job after I'd completed the update, everything ran fine. When I look at the employees, you can actually see that all the employees are now loaded into this table, and they should match everything that's in the CSV. So now we don't need to worry about the CSV. We don't need to worry about the SQL schema. Everything's all set up. So when we go back over to our org chart, I'm hoping what we can now see, if we go to the directory, here we go. So we can see everyone's name now in the directory. And so if I search for Sutton, which is our second person, you see that Ari Sutton is our recruiter in Chicago, and there's the email. So I can click on that, and that would open it up in my email browser. Click on Ari's name, and it actually takes us to the employee page. You can see here that looking at employees and the employee ID. And so if there's more information in here, we can actually, the direct manager is here, Quinn Brooks. And so Quinn Brooks is our director of people ops. Go to Cameron Patel, chief people officer, and then go to Avery Morgan, chief executive officer. And so now we have our directory working. Let's try our org chart and see if that works. Okay, it's rendered. It doesn't look that great, but we're essentially building this down from Avery Morgan, who's our CEO. Let's assume that we just wanted to look at the engineering team. So we can look at Jordan Lee, who's chief technology officer. So if we just select Jordan, we can show his tree or her tree, and we can see that now generated down. So everything's working. We have that kind of basic infrastructure. One of the things that I'm going to do, probably outside of this, is actually update the UI. And this is probably a good time to just take a step away and look at the different tools that are potentially available to us. So there are a lot of different coding tools out there. I think Codex is one of the best for actually building the kind of core infrastructure. A lot of my work is actually building out the back end infrastructure, because that's where all the logic happens. So for the front end, because I'm not a UI person, I actually really like to use something called V0 app. And so what you can actually do here is have this build out a really kind of great front end. And you could do it using they have different design systems in here. They have different templates. So if you want to build a landing page, that's actually the first version of the landing page. I just give this a prompt and kind of had that build out. So there's a lot you can do in here, and actually they look a lot simpler, a lot nicer than the kind of generic templates that are generated through Codex. So that would be one thing that I would probably look to next, just because this looks like it's something out of the 90s. We have the structure in place. We have our home directory, our org chart. So let's go back to our prompts and see where we are. So we've got the CSV input pipeline working. Now we want the authorization and the role gates. So I'm going to copy this. Let's drop this into Codex, and hopefully we don't have any more failures with our database. One of the things I've found is some of the biggest challenges that I see when actually building things into production is connecting them to hosted services. It's why I like to use the simplest form possible. So in Azure, I just use app service because we can deploy it directly from the development environment. For databases, if we don't already have a database set up, and I use Postgres, I actually have a fully hosted database in Azure. Using something like Supabase allows you to spin things up very quickly. Otherwise, you wind up with these local databases that are then kind of hard to transport. But once you have something that's kind of already set up and is actually easy to integrate, it just makes the whole process much easier for you over the long run. I think this is going to be a little slower because I probably overloaded my kind of tokens with all the debugging that I had to do. Hopefully you won't face that debugging, because we figured out the problem, and you can essentially just copy the kind of the database schema creation process and drop it into your Superbase to actually give you your database setup. So now what we're going to do is actually add authentication and authorization. So we're going to add these roots in here. This is going to allow us to gate access to the app and make sure that you actually have to log in order to see everything. We should be able to have the Microsoft OAuth, but we're actually going to use the Magic Link as the fallback so that we don't have to set everything up. If you are already in an enterprise IT setting, you probably already have access to these kind of tools. And so when you actually come to produce this and push this to production, you're probably going to be partnering with the IT team to actually make sure that this is restricted to just people with the appropriate access. And so using those Entra IDs or whatever authorization process you have in place is going to be really, really key there. And all it's going to do is make sure that we make sure that no one can import data who's not an admin or a HR editor. The server-side role is where it checks, and it's not just checking in the client. And so the important thing there is you have your client, which is the browser that the end user is going to use to actually interact with the app. Then you have your server, which is where all the back-end logic happens. Now, what can happen is if you do the check on the client side, and that sends a clear kind of signal back to your server to release the information, is if you spoof the client side and say, actually, I am an admin or I am an editor, which you can do by editing some of the code in the browser, the server can actually give you information that it shouldn't give you. So if all the checks are happening on the server side, it's going to make sure that the data is extra secure. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's just something that we want to make sure. And the prompts that I've given you here should give you most of the security processes that you would need. Obviously, if this is going to go into production, there's probably going to need to be some extra checks in place, but that's where we are right now. So let's see how our Codex is coming along. So we can actually kind of go back and just take a look here. So one of the things that I'm a little concerned about that I didn't see last time is that the data is currently unrestricted here. We are actually going to be adding more gates to the process, but again, this is probably something that you want to kind of lock down before this goes into production and make sure that a random anonymous person can't access your database and actually edit things, especially when you think about adding some more secure information like date of birth or gender or start dates or addresses, that you want this to be as secure as possible. All right, so I think we've implemented all of this. So let's reload our server and see if we get bumped to a login. Here we go. All right, so sign in. So this still looks terrible. All right, so here is our org chart. So I'm now fully logged in. If I click on import, I'm not authorized. So we know that the security check is working. You see it's unauthorized down here. If I look at the org chart, then I can still access, I can still search the directory, and we know that everything is in place. But weirdly, we have login and log out up here. So again, something with the UI is a little messed up here, and we'd actually want to fix that before we push this into production. But this is working fine. Everything is kind of going according to plan. We have our role gates, we have our authorization. One of the things that we're going to do now, we'll just finish everything off with our admin role management now. So we'll get this prompt running. All this is doing is actually adding an admin page so that if we are an admin and we log in, we can actually make some edits. But what we want to do is actually add me as an admin. So once authorization is kind of wired in, what I'm going to do is copy this. I'm going to go back to our Superbase page. We're going to go to our SQL editor. I'm going to create a new one so we don't lose that. Paste this in here and then run this, and hopefully we don't get an error. Success, no roles returned. Okay, so all we've done there is give my email address the admin privileges. If we go back to the tables, we actually look at user roles, we should now see that my email address is role admin. And so we created it, it's now been updated. And so when I log in now, once Codex is finished with the admin interface, I should then see the admin page. Actually, as the admin, be able to go in and make adjustments. So I should then be able to import new data, but I should be able to edit the data directly in the app and actually save myself a bunch of time. So let's see how that pans out. But I didn't set any of this up. This was all based on the Superbase authorization. So it's actually one of the things that's really nice about Superbase is you don't actually have to set up a whole separate authorization structure. And once your database is set up, you actually have this as a way for people to sign up and to kind of click through. So that's a pretty handy little tool. Let's close that down and we will keep moving forward. Okay, let's see. So while we're waiting for the Codex to finish, we can kind of go back and look to see what's coming up. So once the admin role management is in place, we're going to do the final hardening. So this is basically just make sure that everything's ready to go, that we can deploy it into production. and that we hopefully won't have any more issues. And that should be pretty much us ready to go. As I said, I think one thing that we'd want to do is actually give a prompt to Codex to update the UI to a more modern interface, and we can choose different inspirations that we may want to take from different tools that we like. So implement is stage 6. So now we should have the admin role all set up. If I now restart the server, okay, so now if we click to admin, so because I am the admin, I now have ability to update roles, to kind of change roles, delete anything from here. When I click on import, I can actually import now because I am the admin, and I still have access to the org chart and the directory and everything else. The final thing we're going to do is do that final hardening, drop that into here. The other thing I'm going to do actually is just add one final note here, is to 6, update the UI to a modern Slack interface. So very kind of simple prompts. I'm not giving it much direction, just for kind of speed. You can see at the bottom of the demo sequence, what have we gone through? Prompt 1 through 7, made some slight adjustments to prompt 7. When you run this yourself, you might actually find that the UI is already generated for you. The beauty of Codex is that it does have a lot of natural language understanding. So when you do say, I don't like the way this looks, or I'd like this to look more like an Apple product or a Microsoft product or whatever, it will do that. The other thing that I generally will do is take my logo, drop it into the source folder, and ask it to wire it up so that we have the logo wired up as an icon on the browser bar. You can see right now the browser bar is just a kind of generic kind of world symbol, and actually create kind of more of a kind of UI based around the color scheme that I have. It'll take a little bit longer to do that, and I'm hoping it won't take too long to maybe do a quick update on the UI, but I just wanted to make sure that we kind of finish up with something that looks a little bit more professional. We've gone through the prompts, we've done the Supabase updates, we've kind of tested it as we've gone along. We've created the admin role, so I'm now the admin in the app. We've imported the sample database, and we've demoed all of the different click-through links. And so once this is all done, the next thing we want to do is actually deploy this into production. And so it's doing the UI updates now. That's generally pretty quick. So we're going to deploy it to our Azure server here. We're going to use an integration from Azure. We're having some issues with this today. Let's see if we can refresh. Here we go. Okay, you can actually update this yourself if you look through your dev environment and actually figure out how to get the different integrations. I've gone through the whole process of logging in and setting up so my Azure account's linked. But if we go into the Azure sponsorship and we go into YouTube demo, which is our new resource group that we set up, and the Meander org chart, what we can do is see that we actually have everything already in here. We don't have anything deployed yet, so we're not really going to see anything. But within application settings, here we can actually start to add in the unique variables that we've already set in our local environment. So if we load up the environment.local, which is what we use in to connect to our Supabase, what we need to do is just add these settings in directly. Now you can do this in the browser on the Azure site, but I find it really easy to do this in here. And so all we're going to do is set these up. So next public Supabase URL, and we're just going to essentially just copy and paste all of these variables into this. And what that's going to do is store them in the local environment on the server, so that when we run the application live, it should build everything out. So let's run this. And I don't think we need this, but I'm just going to add the settings anyway. It's secured to my Azure account. So database URL, and that's going to be this whole line here. Okay, so now you can see in our application settings, we have our next public Supabase URL, which is here, next publishable default key, which is here. We have our Supabase secret default key, which is here, the database password, and the database URL. So everything that we're using in the app is now stored on that server that we've set up. And so when we deploy our app to the server, it should be able to access those files locally. And so let's have a look here. So it looks like it's made the updates. We should be able to just refresh it here. You can see the interface looks much better now. We go to the admin side, go to our directory. You can see this actually looks much nicer. It doesn't like it's something like the 90s. And you can see that we have these little cards now. And so if I click on like Ryan Bishop, for instance, we can see it just looks a little neater, a little tidier. Which if you're going to deploy this to 1,000-person organization, it's you probably want something that looks a little bit better. All right, so this is all done. I'm quite happy with how this looks. Let's close this down and let's actually deploy to our server and just see how we get on. So all I'm going to do is right click here and just click deploy to web app. And we're going to deploy our Meander org chart folder. And before we do this, one thing I sometimes forget to do is just ask Codex to optimize the folder to deploy to Azure, including any ignore files you might need. If I don't take this step, it can actually deploy all of the base files as well. So all this is going to do is go through best practices for Azure and hopefully just kind of build all that out for me. While this is running, let's just go back to our root directory. Let's take another look for our project goal. So based on the project that we've created, can HR managers and finance quickly answer who's on the team, where they sit, and who reports to whom? Yes, I think they can. I think we've looked at the directory, we've looked at the org chart. I think the two main things. We've added authentication. Hopefully you can use the Microsoft authentication. I don't have that set up because I use the G Suite, but we have the Magic Link fallback, and I showed you how we can use that to access the file. We have different roles for admin, HR editor, and viewer. We haven't tested all of those, but it's pretty straightforward to test that, and it seems to work. And we can actually manage a lot of that through our Superbase database. And we have our directory, our org chart, employee cards. We have an import workflow that we've proven works, and we have our kind of admin roles as well. Very simple tech stack. We've used Next.js for our front-end app. We've used Superbase for authorization and to store all the data. And we've done this Zod plus CSV parse. I think I didn't really kind of specify that. That was specified by OpenAI. The repo structure is all set up. We have our environment variables, and we've gone through the whole rebuild. So I think this should be all set. We've added an Azure ignore file in here. We've added deployment. We've added a Docker file, but I don't think we'll be using Docker. So let's just see if this works. Let's just deploy to web app, and we'll deploy our org chart folder and click on deploy. We'll always deploy Meander org chart to our Meander org chart file. And so let's see what happens here. So we have a little status update here. Normally it's a few seconds to actually deploy from the development environment to the server, and then there'll be kind of logs that you can track and see how things are going on the actual deploy itself. Normally what I will do when I'm even just deploying minor updates to my website is actually go to my Azure account, look at the deployment center there, and actually track the logs and just see if anything fails. But what we're hoping to get through now is showing how we can then deploy to the app and then access this app from pretty much anywhere in the world, as long as we have the right login details. So we'll test that and we'll see how that goes. While we're waiting for that, we're going to go over to Azure. I can show you where the deployment center is in here. So deployment center is here. We have logs and the last deployment. Hopefully once this deploys, we'll see a succeeded. So this is actually building the app out. And if you click, you can actually see the stages that the server is going through to deploy it. Again, if you're using Docker, you're essentially taking the Docker file and kind of dropping it into the container on the server. This is my preferred approach. So if we go to the logs here, we can see it's deploying. Let's click here, fetching changes. This is still at the very early stages of a deployment. Generally, the first deployment takes a long time to go through. So this might take a while. Let's go back to our Azure. You see it's building the first app. All right, so we've got a success here. If I click browse website, that's actually not going to load up because it still has a lot of building to do actually within the server itself. And so when we look down here, we've got a pending. Let's refresh this. So it's building our application. And when we go into the logs, what we should hopefully see now is a new deployment, which is running the build process. When I click on deployment ID, I should be able to see exactly what's happening. And so this is actually going through the process of actually building everything out. So this will probably take a while for the first run through. We can close this down. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a wrap up while we're waiting for this to build out, because it might take a few minutes. But I do want to finish by testing and showing that the app is live. What I'm hoping that this walkthrough has done, and it's maybe taken about an hour to go end to end, is just show you that there is a little bit more to actually deploying something to production, but it's not as scary or as inaccessible as I think many people might believe. You can actually take an idea, generate a kind of requirement spec, then actually code it all out in Codex and kind of build something that you can actually really use and actually deploy internally to your team. If this becomes kind of more of a common practice, I think there's definitely going to need to be some changes made to how we empower individuals within an organization. If you think about this is going to replace something like an Excel spreadsheet that then has to be version controlled and tracked and everything else, if you build this as like a single tool, you don't actually have to rely on your internal enterprise engineering team to do this for you. Maybe you want a little bit of support, but this is actually going to free up their resources to do other things that are probably more critical. And so I would really recommend taking a look at all these different kind of ways that you could maybe approach different builds, different tools, and actually figure out if there's a way that you could solve some of the problems by building a tool yourself in an afternoon, then kind of going through the whole process of acquiring a new tech stack and then integrating it along with the cost and then ongoing support that's going to be needed for that. And I think what's really special about this is once you get familiar with how the process works, you can really ideate on anything that you want and really build some incredible tools that solve problems in very unique ways. I hope that this was really helpful. What I would really like is to hear some feedback on if you've implemented something like this, how it went. If you have more ideas for different approaches that you might want to take, please drop the questions and comments wherever you see this, whether this is within Meander Talent Academy or on YouTube or on LinkedIn. What I'm hoping to do really is start the conversation going so that you can think through all different kind of approaches here. Generally, there's a lot more data cleaning and implementation and change management incorporated into the projects that I take on. You can reach out, we can discuss an engagement, or if you just want a little bit of advice, just drop me a note, and hopefully I'll be able to maybe help you see the forest for the trees and kind of like work through some of those potential challenges. Let's do one more check. We'll refresh. Still running the build out. These things always take longer than we anticipate. Let's see if we load this up. Yeah, so this is the page that we would normally get when the app is kind of ready to go. We're just waiting for the deployment to finish. And so we know that at least the domain is working. Let's refresh. Back to logs. This is always the most painful part, especially the first time you deploy an app